a car for just $1,000. And I'm sure that Ted Olin has probably taken a ride in one of those nanos. But it was produced in West Bengal in India. Where did the idea to produce the nano, the smallest, the cheapest car, okay, and nobody has been able to compete with that? How did Tata, the famous Indian industrialist, get the idea from? Where did he get the idea from? He said once when he was traveling, he found on the road a family which was also commuting, traveling, but in actually there's a sidecar attached to a scooter kind of thing. You have a scooter and you have a sidecar, and he felt that was how uncomfortable that is. That is one aspect. Some others say that when he saw an Indian family only on a motorbike, so you have the guy riding there, then there is this, and there are children on one bike. There are children, there is his wife. Okay, so yeah, so this gave him an idea. And he said, look, I must build a people's car so that people, all common folks, can travel. But and he also said that it must be an environment-friendly car. But then what happened was, when he was producing this car and talking about an environment-friendly car, someone there had sleepless nights. And that man is the chief of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change at Al Gore. Because they said, look, if we are going to produce so many cars in India, and with the infrastructure, with the roads and all in such a bad shape, what is going to happen really in terms of environment, in terms of clean air? So we are only looking at, and what does he mean by really saying, this is an environment-friendly car, when there's going to be polluting activities going to happen. So, this is something that we have got to really see when we're talking about nano. And also, Tata mentioned that this nano, in and through the nano, through initiatives like the nano, he is fulfilling his corporate social responsibility. I'll leave it to you all to really, give your wording. But this is what he said. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say something. I think we have reached a point in the history, of the world that development is no more based on manpower. Everything is based on technology.
Yeah.
And just taking Africa as an example, and farming as an example, where agriculture is the lifeline of three out of all different countries in Africa.
Sure.
In those days, we based on our manpower, traditional means of farming.
Yeah.
But now, agriculture, government are on their feet to make sure that agriculture has been mechanized.
Yeah.
And looking at the whole picture, we are seeing that the developing countries are living to the detriment of the development because of how much emission of gas they produce. Yeah. Now, my worry is, will the response to global warming be harmful to the world economy if we have to tackle it? Because the estimate is in the year 2050. So will the response to global warming?
The developing nations?
No, in general, I mean.
Yeah.
Will the response to global warming, both from developing and developing nations, will that response be harmful to the world economy?
Okay. Now, see, this is a moot question now, because we are saying, this is where I said, the root is here development paradigms. Because is there an inherent conflict between economic growth and environment? Or can we say that we can have clean environment and at the same time good development? This is where actually the concept of sustainable development actually arises. Is because nobody is saying that we should not have development. I think then there's something wrong with us. Development should take place. Okay? Of course, our wants have to be controlled. Development must take place. Okay? But is our development now that we are kind of development we're doing now, is this development sustainable? So when we talk about the concept of sustainable development, already Brundtland Commission in 1987 talked about this, defined it. How does the definition of sustainable development go? It defines sustainable development as the ability of the present generation to fulfill its needs and aspirations without compromising the needs of future generations to fulfill their needs and aspirations. This is where the question of, in the intergenerational equity will come in. That is, we have a duty towards future generations. We cannot exploit or go on exploiting resources and the earth to such an extent that we hand over the earth to future generations in a very distorted manner. So this is a very important question. So therefore I think we will have to decide on how serious we are with regard to sustainable development. Is our development sustainable? So if you have cleaner technologies, if you have put restrictions on your wants and all that, I suppose this is a possibility. I don't know what the House thinks, but I think it is possible. But so far, I think, we have not been really serious with respect to this. You look at what some countries have said, look, we cannot restrict our emission. Developed countries. This is where it is. Yeah. Yes.
What do you do to offset your own?
Loud enough, please.
What do you do to offset your own ecological footprint? Like, I mean, obviously you came from India here on a plane and you came to Utica on a train. What do you do?
That's a good question. That's a good question. And that is the same question. I can always say the plane was half empty or whatever. Because somebody had to carry somebody. But this is a good question which we have to ask. Even in fact, Al Gore, who received the award for this Nobel Prize, in fact, he has also been asked the same question about the heating systems in his own house. I feel with respect to global warming and our lifestyles, each one of us will have to take this thing very seriously and make an introspection and say, yes, we have done wrong, we have been doing wrong, can we change somewhere, including our own personal selves and our lifestyle? No question about it. Your question is well taken.
Regarding the film that we saw at the beginning, there was a very provocative statement made about carbon trading and environmental refugees.
Right.
I think that's a really interesting statement. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
What do you feel about the current, how do you feel about the carbon market and carbon trading in general?
I would say that once again, once you leave these forces, this whole concept of carbon trading to market forces, trading in carbon, credits and all that, then somewhere again, if you leave it to the marketplace, once again it becomes harmful to the environment. I really don't think it will succeed. In fact, one of the criticisms of Al Gore is because he says he places this into a market situation, as if the remedies are there in the market, which many people have.
Okay, when we discuss the issues of what should be the responses, we very often fall into the pitfall of ethical wishfulness, and I think we immediately talking in terms of rights. We think of what would be the possibilities and what are the chances of introducing the norms of which we're dreaming daily, of saving the globe and the earth. How could we introduce them as quickly as possible? What is your opinion? What are your visions on that? How quickly those norms could be introduced and made binding rules?
Right. Okay.
I think that otherwise it will be just empty talking.
Absolutely. The international negotiations now are not actually binding in a way. Okay? And so therefore countries can get away. But I think ultimately it will have to depend upon individuals in countries who will say, look, can we form alliances? Because I know that in now many countries, including in the United States, people have come together in groups, and there's carpooling, and there is, the question of using less electricity, and, recycling and all that. These attempts are made elsewhere also. Now in India, as happens in other parts of the world also, they are looking for, as for the Bangladesh documentary also, there is a genuine search for alternatives. Like for example, solar energy, wind energy, we talked about it when we were sitting together, wind energy, wave energy, and a number of these alternatives are being tried. And even carbon, Like India is bound to use more and more carbon, coal, which produces very much carbon dioxide. But then they are developing a technology of carbon capture. And they're saying, once again, North America has developed carbon capture technology very much. Can you please give us that technology so that we can use this to prevent or at least limit carbon dioxide emissions?
Where would they deposit the carbon, the CO2?
Well, there is a good question there actually, but it seems that, this is according to the scientists, that there is a way of actually, capturing it and putting it down underground. And you will say that perhaps the water flow, hydrological
Yes.
this thing can be affected.
Right.
But scientists are saying that it's possible at least to limit the damage. And this is possible. Limiting the damage is possible, I think. Yes. Yes, sir.
I've enjoyed your discussion very
Yeah.
much. But I seem to detect in it kind of bias that's all too common in discussions of the environment these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
And that global warming has become the issue when it's not. There are other issues that are related with it that we have not mentioned at all.
Yeah.
It's not even the only issue of scale. We have the population issue, for
Yeah.
example. We have global dimming.
Yeah.
And loss of biodiversity is not simply a product of global warming. It's a separate and significant issue. How is developing green technology going to solve these issues?
True. Okay. Now we have population problems happening. And of course in the developing world what is happening now, especially with regard to China, once again, there is this one child now, I think, which is taken pretty seriously. In the case of India, it is very difficult to impose standards and all that. But once again, in the context of population and global warming, in the talk on climate justice, what developing nations are saying is that although our population is very large, our per capita emissions are very low compared to those of the developed nations. And that is where the climate justice issue really comes in very strongly. So therefore, this is not to say that therefore we must go on increasing the population. I think there are serious efforts to limit population. But in the context of justice, what the developing nations are saying very clearly is that, look, our per capita emissions are far lower than the per capita emissions of the developed world. And you're true, there are other problems which we need to tackle. Yeah. Yes. One side you and then. Yes, sir. You first.
Yeah, well, as an alternative, what about the nuclear power?
Yeah.
It does not contribute to global warming. I mean, people have challenged me, as an advocate of controlling emissions. They say, well, how come you're against nuclear power?
Okay.
If you're really worried about, it,
Right.
that
Yes.
the Earth being destroyed by global.
Okay. Yeah. Now this nuclear issue is a very tricky one because in our search for alternatives in India, nuclear power is said to be one of the alternatives. And then of course immediately you have people opposing it and saying, no, nuclear energy is dangerous, it cannot be that polluting if it is properly controlled, but then if there are no proper controls on this, then what's going to happen? And there is a controversy on that. In India, the position is that some are saying yes, some are saying no. In fact, our present Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh, he's been pushing for nuclear energy, and therefore, our agreement with the United States is not signed, but there's a lot of push from the government to have nuclear energy. Some feel it is okay, others feel it's not okay. So there's a debate on this. Yeah. I would think, intrinsically, it's dangerous to have nuclear, energy because of the lapses that can happen, leakages that can take place. So it's a very risky proposition. So that's what my take on that would be. Yes, sir.
Well, part of the problem with nuclear energy that you really haven't mentioned, part of the problem with nuclear energies that you really haven't mentioned yet is that the waste it produces is far harder for the environment to contain because, quite frankly, it's not something found without man's intervention.
True. You see, this is the intrinsic danger of, we're actually playing with fire. Now, where does the waste, nuclear waste of the United States and Europe go? Where does it go? So this is known as, some people have described this as environmental terrorism.
Yes.
Because they have said the US and the West, they are forcibly dumping their nuclear waste on the shores of poorer countries. And I've even heard and read that the mafia is involved in a big way in this, because there's big money. So wherever there is big money, there is mafia. Okay? So then they are very much involved in this. And you can imagine the injustice there. We are talking about justice, okay? Justice, injustice. Why should, if it is dangerous on your shore, how is it that it is okay in somebody else's shore? So you see, this is the, they call it environmental terrorism of a kind. So we have
Earlier you spoke a little bit about limiting our resources or just trying to limit the ecological footprint, but how can India limit when you have these global powers like the US outsourcing and creating factories, more and more factories in India?
Well, these outsourcings are on what account? IT?
Well, I don't know, like I know a lot of clothing stores open up shops in India because it's cheaper and that just contributes even more to
Right.
CO2.
Yes. The debate in India is the same, because the contradictions in India, as Professor Ted also in a way pointed out, that there is this need to develop. But I think a distinction that needs to be made, and perhaps that is where we'll come closer to resolving this contradiction, would be that a strong government in India can definitely say, look, emissions can go on as long as these are directed towards meeting the basic needs of people. But if the needs of the wealthier ones are what are going to be met through technology and other things, then I think there should be a cap on that. So when you have such kind of a differentiated policy, then I think there is a possibility, even for India, to make sure that its ecological footprint is not that large. This would be my response. Yes, sir.
Well, and the comment along those lines, who is it that's buying the goods from China and India? Us. In fact, China's our best.
I admire your self-critical and analytical, yes, sure.
But I did want to mention that, I think it's pretty widely agreed that oil has peaked, that live oil has peaked, and so now we're on a downturn. So whether they raise the price so high we can't afford to, buy the stuff, or we're going to run out of it in 30 or 40 years. So we're going to have to be forced, and not because of our good intentions,
Yes.
and our self-limiting, our desires for goods. We're going to have to find alternative sources of fuel anyway.
Sure. It's a compulsion. It becomes a compulsion. Sure.
So,
Yes, sir.
What I think is so dynamic about environmental issues such as global warming and the population issue and the biodiversity issue is that it's a grassroots movement in its very essence. And I think that when we're talking about developing countries as well and how they need to reduce their ecological footprint, we also need to look at the education that those countries receive at the grassroots level, at the very bottom of the poverty line, and educate the people so they realize that their daily life and the trash that they leave on the sidewalk is the trash that ends up going through their water and makes it unsafe to drink.
Absolutely. Very good response. I think if you, maybe the last one. Yeah.
I think just to build on that, part of the piece to this puzzle is that the gap between the haves and have-nots, the gap between the rich and the poor, even in developed countries, is becoming so great that when people are struggling to survive, they don't care about the environment. They don't care about the garbage that they're putting in the streets. They don't care if they're producing something that's causing pollution because they just need to survive.
Right.
So
yes.
That's a big, huge part of this problem.
True. Indira Gandhi, India's famous Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, late Prime Minister, she was at Stockholm Conference in 1972, which was actually a watershed conference because environment came on the agenda of nations in a very, very strong way. She said, and this is to resonate with what you're saying, is that poverty is the biggest polluter, she said. And therefore she asked developed nations to please transfer your technology to us, so that we can really adopt sustainable development in a meaningful way. Otherwise, we are reaching nowhere. You want to ask something? maybe the last one before we wind up. I don't know how many minutes do we have. Okay. Yes. Yes, I will come back. Yes.
Since I'm not American, I think I could talk about
Yeah.
the culture of criticism and also the methodology of criticism, which takes us to the deepest roots of the phenomena of global warming. And sorry to say, but I'm very close to the Marxist point of view. And again, shall we, it was mentioned here that globalization is a very, how to say, mildly, left-wing project, let's say, and it's a type of development that provides rights to investors, but not rights to those who really. So, what I want to say is that shall we again raise the issue of what model of development shall we follow in terms of economics?
Absolutely.
And that's not only international, that's national